Hi, I'm Lauren Baines, the Interim Director of the Saisset Museum at Santa Clara University. And today we're going to be going through the California Stories from Tamian to Santa Clara exhibition that shares the history of the site that we occupy today on campus and the history of those whose ancestral land this is. So the California Stories exhibition is essentially the redesign of our previous California History exhibition. And it was really important for the museum in that redesign to incorporate and center the voices of Native community members and to really speak to the heritage of Native California communities, the colonization and missionization of this area through Ranchero to early Santa Clara College. And we're continuing to incorporate new elements. Native California communities, including the Ohlone, were incredibly innovative, had really ingenious ways of working with natural materials, yes, but for complex purposes and with varying techniques. So the same materials were used from basketry to housing to hunting materials. So as you come through the exhibition, with yourself or with your students, you can really explain how they were utilizing natural resources, but in a very complex way with their ecological knowledge, whether that be seasonal changes, geographic areas. They would migrate to different areas at different times of the year, knowing where different resources would be available at what time of the year. Behind me you see one of the murals that was commissioned for the California Stories exhibition. The Santa Clara Valley region was a much wetter environment hundreds of years ago. Due to human development, there's been destruction of wetlands, watershed depletion, obviously climate change that we're all aware of that has led to a drier environment today. But water was much more prevalent within the Ohlone community and their lifeways prior to colonization. Water was a means of fishing, certainly. It was also a means of travel and trade between communities. The flora and fauna were much more robust than what we see today. We actually have some pretty incredible resources that specify the actual species of flora and fauna that you're seeing in this mural, as well as the village life mural adjacent. When we think about some of the agricultural techniques that were brought with the Spanish to this region, we can anticipate how some of this started. There was a very different approach to land management. Different species were introduced, wheat and corn, cows and horses. We now had fields for grazing, agriculture approach in a very different way than what was practiced traditionally by the indigenous communities. So we started seeing a different treatment of the land, and then certainly over time, over centuries, over decades, build up of Silicon Valley. So the Santa Clara Valley really shifting into a higher density, a lot of building on the land, and not allowing some of the natural waterways to exist in the way that they once did. One other aspect that might be of interest to you and your students when thinking about environmental justice is what community members today are facing. So I bring into the conversation 3 baskets here that were created by Rumsey and Ohlone artist Linda Yamani specifically for this exhibition. And there's 2 parts to the story that I want to tell you. One is when learning about the basketry techniques of her own culture, Linda Yamani had to travel to museums on the East Coast and in Europe to see examples of Ohlone basketry, where cultural heritage has literally been taken and extracted from this region and put in collections so that contemporary tribal members have to travel to visit and appreciate and learn from aspects of their own culture. In terms of environmental justice, I bring up these baskets because Linda completely sources the material. To do so, she sometimes has to get permission from landowners. So in some cases, when she's creating the Tule boat, for example, that you see in this exhibition, she had to volunteer and become an official volunteer of certain parks to go and harvest the tule. Looking at stewardship, we think of California Native communities that were really working, I would say almost in collaboration with the natural resources and using their knowledge of the ecology to support, yes, their sustenance and their survival, but also to ensure the survival of nature around them. Then we see with the Spanish coming through that there's a real shift in introducing new crops and new flora and fauna that are not indigenous to the area. We see obviously a shift in the diet that the native population is being exposed to. And in some cases that diet was not well received. It's really difficult to think through decolonization of culinary practices because some of the foods that were introduced in the Mission era did over time become traditional foods and processes. So that's another lens through which we can think about the agriculture and the culinary changes that were happening during this time, that it's not always easy to tease apart and say this is a traditional practice and this is not. The Franciscan Padres had intended for the land that was missionized to be returned to the indigenous communities in time. In general, that did not come to fruition as this area transitioned from Spanish rule to Mexican rule and the missions were secularized. Land in general transitioned to the hands of Mexican families known as Californios or rancheros. There were only a handful of land grants that actually went to indigenous community members. One individual was Lope Inigo, and you'll get to see his portrait when you visit California Stories. He's believed to be one of the last living individuals at Mission Santa Clara. The land that we directly occupy on this campus is ancestral Ohlone and Muwekma Ohlone land that has not been given back, has not been fully recognized as an ancestral homeland for many years. There's a lot of work that the university has been doing in recent years to build and develop these relationships, to work towards reconciliation. This exhibition, the work of the Ohlone History Working Group, the recent inaugural Native American Symposium, these are all steps in an ongoing process, but the process doesn't end. Just like this exhibition is ongoing, this work is ongoing, and it's a complicated process, and it requires a lot of listening and a lot of action on our part. And there's ways that we can think about how even as a university we can be better stewards of the land that we occupy, but also use that influence more regionally. This new feature in California Stories joined the museum in the fall of 23. It was designed in collaboration with members of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, leadership, council members, and youth in collaboration with SU faculty, staff, and students. It came out of a conversation from the Ohlone History Working Group report that called for the development of a virtual wall, some way to commemorate the Native individuals who lived, labored, and died at Mission Santa Clara. So what you're seeing on this first screen, and it will rotate like a slideshow, is demographic information. You saw at the beginning that we have a list of names. In the background, those 7,612 individuals are recorded here by name, according to the name within the Sacramento records that were recorded by the Franciscan Padres. When we were able to, we have used Native names. 100% of Native individuals at Mission Santa Clara had Native names, but only 44% were recorded by the Spanish Padres. So for those that we don't know the Native name, we're using the Spanish given name. Once you enter into the program, there are 7 different themes that you can navigate between: labor, Native leaders, mission connections, mobility and resistance, emancipation, survivors, and demographics. Each of those themes are essentially a page. Each page has similar content. You first have an introduction explaining how we're addressing that theme. Then there are 4 biographies. The biographies are of Native individuals who lived at Mission Santa Clara. The biographies are compiled using Mission Sacramento records, tribal knowledge, family stories, and were pieced together by SCU students in collaboration with 2 Muwekma youth who were interning with SCU. In addition to that text, each section also has a connection to today that brings you to a video. The video are interviews with members of the Muwekma tribe when they were here on site in the summer of 2023 for the Ohlone Cultural Campout. So as you're going through or choose to integrate this into a class, you can actually press the videos and students will hear Native individuals introduce themselves. Many of them introduce themselves first in Chichenyo, so you'll hear Chichenyo, and then English. And they're talking about these themes, both as they reflect on mission life for their ancestors, but also, as the name implies, connections to today. So we hear aspects of gentrification, of current connections to ancestral land. So you can take those themes from conversation, from missionization to contemporary life. In time, we hope that this will actually be a fully realized website as well, so that you can access it outside of the museum. There's also conversation of how this, possibly in a different physical iteration, but this content would be available near the Mission Church, so that those who are on the grounds and near one of the sites of the mission cemeteries can access the same commemoration. I hope you'll consider incorporating California stories from Tamiami to Santa Clara in your courses. This is an ongoing exhibition, so you could certainly count on developing ideas with us over the years to come. That might take the form of a class visit that is self-guided. You can also work with us to arrange a guided tour, and we can focus on different themes and aspects of the exhibition and engage in dialogue with your class. And there might be more extensive projects. There might be a writing assignment or research paper that you'd like to collaborate with the museum on. You know, we're open to all of this and other ideas as well. A couple things just to give you a sense of some of the projects that we've done in the past. We've certainly toured classes through to focus on basketry and different techniques. We have done decolonization tours, talking about the narrative of the mission era. We have also done projects working with artifacts in the collection. For example, a recent class, Virtual Santa Clara, 3D scanned objects from the collection to create 3D printed models. So there's a lot of different directions we can go. We also have additional resources that aren't part of the physical exhibition that you would see. So if you're curious, for example, about the flora and fauna and the murals, we have detailed notes and information. So just start a dialogue with us. We'd love to talk through the possibilities with you.